recording now. And that's all in terms of logistics. So I want to introduce our speaker. For today is Gengchen Mai. Gengchen is a PhD candidate at the Space and Time for Knowledge Organization Lab, CQO Lab, here at the Geography Department at UC Santa Barbara. His PhD advisor is Professor Christoph Janovich. His research interests include machine learning, deep learning, GIS science, geographic question answering, natural language processing, geographic information retrieval, knowledge graphs, and semantic web. Currently, Gengchen's research is highly focused on geographic question answering and especially explicit machine learning models. He received his bachelor's degree in Geographic Information System from Wuhan University. Thus far, he has completed 4 AA and machine learning research-based internships at Esri, Say Mosaic, Apple Maps, and Google X. And now he serves as machine learning consultant and advisor for Google X. So we all are happy to have you here, Gengchen. The microphone is yours, and I'll let you know when time is almost up. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Marcella, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending these presentations. I'm a final year PhD candidate at SE-KGE Lab, UC Santa Barbara. Today, I want to present my recent papers about space-to-vec. So the core idea is a general purpose multi-scale representation model for space using the grid cell principle. So I will show how this kind of location representation can be used in 4 tasks: the POI representation learning, geo-aware fine-grained image classification, geographic question answering, and spatial semantic lifting. So this talk is based on my recent 2 papers on this topic published in iClear 2020 and Transaction GS. So the papers and GitHub repos are listed below. So this is the outline for this today's talk. For the first part of this talk, I will introduce the space-to-vec model, which encodes the absolute positions and spatial relationship of place inspired by the biological grid cell. And I will discuss 2 tasks, POI classifications and geo-aware fine-grained image classification. And then I further applied it to a knowledge graph and design a knowledge graph embedding model for 2 tasks on top of knowledge graph. So, okay, let me first discuss my first paper about space-to-vec. Unsupervised test encoding models such as word-to-vec, gloves, and ELMOS and transformers has been effectively utilized by many NLP tasks. The core idea is to encode words into vector representations based on their positions and context. So for example, the position encoding model in the transformer encodes word positions in the sentence with multiple sinusoid functions with different frequencies. In geospatial domain, encoding locations into vector representations is also a critical task. So now let me first give a problem definition of location encoding. So given a set of point P, like a point of interest in L-dimensional space, each point is associated with a location xi and an attribute vi. So attribute can be a POI feature such as the place types and POI names. We define function fx, which maps any coordinate x in space to a vector representation of d dimension. So this function fx encodes the probability distribution of point features over space and can give a representation of any point in the space. So it's not limited to the set of point P. So attribute and coordinate of points can be seen as an analogy of word and word positions in the common use of word embedding models. So in fact, generate learning-friendly representation from points in space for machine learning algorithms is a long-standing research problem. Recently, the computer vision community shows increasing interest in incorporating geographic information in neural network for many tasks, such as image classification. So there are many well-established approaches, such as radio-based functions, RBF, which may be known as the kernel density estimation. However, for this kind of kernel-based approaches, choosing the correct scale, which we can understand as the kernel bandwidth, is challenging. Also, the RBF need to memorize the training samples while doing prediction. So the tile-based approaches discretize the study area into regular grids to model the geographic prior distribution of image categories. However, choosing the correct scale or the cell size is challenging, and it does not scale well in terms of memory. So the recent work feeds the coordinate directly into a feed-forward neural network to obtain location embeddings. However, it is hard for this kind of single-scale models to capture the fine-grained spatial distribution. So the key challenges for location encoding is to join modeling spatial distribution with very different characteristics. For example, the different POI types have different spatial distribution patterns. The woman's clothing shows a cluster distribution, whereas education is rather evenly distributed. So replace K plots in the right show these distinctions for different POI types. In order to handle this, we need an encoding method which supports multi-scale representation. So in other side, in order to design an artificial neural network-based location encoding model, it is also beneficial to first see how humans and animals reason about geolocation in their daily lives for tasks such as self-position, navigation, plan integrations, and path finding. In fact, another motivation of location representation comes from the field of neuroscience, especially the recent Nobel winning neuroscience research on grid cell. By recording the activations of red neurons during navigation within a square regions, some neurons in its external cortex have a hexagon ferrite patterns. This kind of neurons is named a grid cell. So research has demonstrated that the grid cells in mammal provide a multi-scale periodical representation that functions as a matrix for location encoding, which is critical for path integrations and spatial localization. Moreover, previous research shows that this representation can be simulated by summing three cosine grading functions oriented 60 degrees apart, which may be regarded as simple FLIR models of this hexagon lattice. The connections between grid cells in mammal brains and neurons in artificial neural network give us a lot of inspirations about how to encode location in a neural network models. As a goal set, it's more likely a 2D location X is represented by a population of neurons, like grid cells, so that these grid cells form a vector representations of this location X. So, inspired by these biological grid cells, we propose a multi-scale representation learning model for space called space2web. The core idea is that before feeding into the feed-forward neural network, we first decompose the input coordinate into a multi-scale periodical representation by following the idea of grid cell location encoding. We use this theory encoder as a point space encoder to represent point coordinate into a distributed representation. So as for the point feature encoder, it encodes features VI into a feature embedding. For example, if each point represents a POI with multiple POI types, the feature embedding EVI can simply be the mean of each POI's types embeddings. Here, as you can see in the equation, the TH indicates the H type embedding of a POI with H types. The feature embedding is developed to facilitate us to do POI classification tasks. So where the output location embedding can be used in multiple tasks, such as POI classification and image classification. We evaluate our models on those two tasks. So as for the first task, we consider two settings, the location modeling and spatial context modeling. In location modeling settings, we use a location encoder to directly reconstruct the point feature embeddings given in space embedding. So for training, we use the inner product to compare the reconstructed feature embedding against its real feature embeddings and other negative points. So for the space context modeling, we use a space context decoder to reconstruct the feature embedding of the center point based on the space and feature embeddings of n nearby points. Because the fitting order of context point should not affect the prediction result. So we develop a space-aware graph attention neural network. Compared with the traditional graph attention models, we include the spatial displacement embedding we can see here in the attention architecture to allow the model aware of the distance and the direction information between the center point and contact points. As we show in the red box, this spatial displacement embedding is computed based on the point space encoders we show above. So the unsupervised learning task can simply be maximizing the log likelihood of observing the true point pi at position xi among all the points in P. So the negative sampling can be used to improve the efficiency of training. So here is the evaluation result of the location modeling setting in PY classification task. The baseline we consider are single scale embedding called direct and wrap, which is published in CVPR last year. The kernel-based methods such as RBF and the tail embedding models. We can see that the best result come from the various versions of grid cell models you can see here, which are capable of dealing with multi-scale representations. So in order to show how our multi-scale location representation models will affect the prediction of PY types with different distribution patterns, we classify the in total 1,020 PY types into 3 groups based on their distribution pattern. We define a parameter called radius R, which is derived from each PY type's renormalized replaced K curves. We name these 3 groups clustered, middle, and even distribution. The above table shows the performance of multiple baselines as well as our theory models on the test dataset of location modeling tasks with respect to these 3 different PY distribution groups. So we can see that baseline models without scale-related parameters such as direct and wrap, or within some scale parameters such as the tail and RBF, are not performing ideally across all scales, where our theory model can handle distribution in different scales. We also do hierarchical clusterings on this response map, which are shown here. We can see that when restricted to large grid cell, like lambda mean is equal to 1,000 meters, our theory models have a similar representation and performance compared to RBF model, where it is able to significantly outperform it when small grid cell size are available. So this table shows the evaluation result of spatial context modeling. So we can see that the baseline approaches like the direct and the tail, wrap, and RBF generally perform poorly in context modeling. Because of that, we designed some specialized version of this approach, such as polar tail, and the scaled RBF within a polar coordinates, which lead to a significant improvement. Note that these are models proposed by us to specialize for context model. So these models are less general than the grid cell approaches. So we can see that the grid cell approaches are able to perform better than the specialized approaches on the test dataset, will have a competitive performance on the validation dataset. So to demonstrate the generalizabilities of the space-to-work, we also apply to another text, which is the GeoWare image classification, or we can see the fine-grained species recognition. The idea is that the location information of an image of a species can be utilized to train a geographic prior information for each image label, which is a species. So it is particularly work well when the species is very difficult to differentiate from its appearance information. However, it has very different geographic prior distribution. We can see that both our grid and theory model outperform previous model on 2 fine-grained image classification tasks with significant size. If you are interested in our papers, you can find it on arXiv and open review. Our code is also available on the GitHub. So to conclusion for the first part of this talk, we introduce an encoder decoder framework as a general purpose representation model for space inspired by the biological grid cells multi-scale priority representation. We show the effectiveness of this model on 2 tasks, the PY classification and GeoWare image classification. Our analysis also reveals that it is ability to integrate representation of different scales that makes the Gaussian model outperform the other baselines on these two tasks. Okay, before I move on, is there any questions for the first part? Okay, so let me move on to the second part of this paper, which is about further applied space-to-vec to do geographic logical query answering and spatial semantic lifting. In order to do both tasks, we propose location-aware knowledge graph embedding models based on space-to-vec. This is a novel knowledge graph embedding techniques which directly encode the spatial footprint, namely the point coordinate and bounding box of each geographic entities, thereby making them available where training a knowledge graph embedding model. This model enable us to do geographic logical query answering and spatial semantic lifting over a geographic knowledge graph. In order to encode the spatial footprint of geographic entities into the knowledge graph embedding space, we utilize a location encoder architecture. More specifically, we are using our previous introduced space-to-vec model here. However, there is several challenges to remains to be solved. The first one is that the location encoder can handle point-wise matrix relations such as distance, like nearest city, as well as direction information like north and south in a knowledge graph. However, it is not easy to encode regions which are critical for relations such as containment, which the DBO is part of. So in order to fix that, we have to find a way to represent geographic entities as regions instead of points in an embedding space. The second challenge is how to seamlessly handle geographic and non-geographic entity together in the same entity encoder framework. The third challenge is how to capture the spatial and other semantic aspects in the same time while designing a spatially explicit knowledge graph embedding model. The last challenge is how to design a model so that it can be used to infer new relations between entities in a knowledge graph and any arbitrary locations in the starting area. So we call this task is spatial semantic lifting as an analogy to the traditional semantic lifting, which refer to the process of associating unstructured content to geographic knowledge resources. So now we present our location-aware knowledge graph embedding models, which overcome these four challenges. So given a geographic knowledge graph, V is a set of entities and E is a set of directed edges. VPT is the geographic entity set, where the PT is a mapping function that maps any geographic entities to its geographic locations, which is coordinate. Where VPN is a subset of VPT, which represents a set of large-scale geographic entities whose spatial extent cannot be ignored, for example, the state and the country. The PN is a mapping function defined on the VPN that maps a geographic entity to its geographic spatial extent. Here, the xmin and xmax indicate the southwest and northeast point of entity's bounding box. So now we give the definition of conjunctive graph query, which can be defined in these equations. The QG is a set of all conjunctive graph query that can be answered over knowledge graph G. V question mark denotes the target variables of query Q, which can be replaced with answer entity A. So this is a target node in Q. Vi through Vm are extensional quantified bounded variable, which will be instantiated during the question answering process. And Bi, which indicated here, is a basic graph pattern in this CGQ, where the EK is the antinode represented in the equation, which we call it the anchor node. So note that the dependency graph of Q represents a computation on a knowledge graph and is commonly assumed to be a directly async graph, which is commonly used in the data structure, where the antinode Q are the source node and the target variable V question mark is a unique sync node. So the conjunctive graph query is said to be a geographic query if the answer entity is a geographic entity. So this is an example of the CQG. So the corresponding natural language question is, which city in the Alameda counties in California is the assembly place of Chevrolet Elch and the nearest city to San Francisco Bay? So the left figure shows a conjunctive graph query and the direct async graph of the query structure. So the B1, B2, B3 is three basic graph pattern in this query, where the question mark place is the target variable indicated as a red node, where the three green nodes are the anchor node. The red figures show the matched underlying knowledge graph patterns represented by the solid arrows. S1, S2, and S3 indicate the matched triples for B1, B2, B3 respectively. So there are three major components of our SE-KGE models. The first is entity encoder, which represents each entity as a high-dimensional vector. And second operator is a projection operator. So given a basic graph pattern, the projection operator projects the subject embedding through a relation-specific matrix to predict the embedding of the VI. So intersection operator integrates the different predicted embedding of the same variable from different basic graph patterns into one single embedding to represent this variable. So to give you an example here, first, the entity encoder encodes these three entities indicated as the green node into the embedding space. And then the projection operator projects the entity embedding into E1 question mark, E2 question mark, and E3 question mark based on a relation-specific projection matrix through the projection operator. And then the intersection operator integrates these three embeddings into one single embedding Q. The last step is using this Q to do a nearest neighbor search in the embedding space to find out the most probable answer. We can also use these three components to do spatial semantic lifting class. Here, given one location X in the study area, for example, this red point, we can use the location encoder to encode X into the embedding space. Note that the location encoder is one component of entity encoder. Here we use projection operator to project this embedding through the relation-specific matrix, a transformation matrix. Here the relation is part of. So the result embedding will be used as a query embedding and to do the nearest neighbor search. So we can use this process to find out the most probable entity which can link to this location through the is part of relation. So since we need to encode the location of geographic entities, we need to design a location-aware entity encoder. So as we said before, we need to consider both aspects, semantic aspect and spatial aspect. As for the semantic aspect, we design an entity feature encoder. Here we develop entity lookup approaches where each entity gets a feature embedding that is initialized randomly. As for the spatial aspect, we design an entity space encoder and take advantages of the space-to-vec model. So the entity encoding process is different depending on the characteristics of input entities. If the entity is a small-scale geographic entity whose spatial footprint is a point, then we directly use space-to-vec to obtain its spatial encoder, spatial embeddings. However, if the embedding is a large-scale entity whose spatial footprint is a bounding box, we will randomly generate a point X as the input for the location encoder based on the 2D uniform distribution based on its spatial extent. Since during training, the spatial encoder will be called multiple times. It will at the end learn a uniform distribution over this entity's bounding box. In practice, one can simply use any process such as a stratified random sampling or vary the spatial assembling densities by expected variance. For entity which doesn't have an entity, which is not a geographic entity, we will simply use embedding a lookup approach similar to the feature encoder. So this is the whole architecture of the entity encoder. So the feature encoder uses embedding lookup approaches to get the feature embedding. And the space encoder utilizes the space-to-vec to encode the spatial footprint of geographic entities. The red box indicates the space-direct model. So the encoding result of both encoder are concatenated as the final output for entity encoder. So this is the entity embedding for the input entity EI. So for the projection operators, we also need to develop two different operators for different tasks. If the basic graph patterns contain an entity node, we use a relation-specific block diagonal matrix to project the entity embedding to its tail embedding. If the input basic graph pattern contains a bounded variable, the same block diagonal matrix is used to do the projections, whereas input is a variable embedding. Where if the input is a location instead of entity, like what we do in the spatial semantic lifting task, we need to use a location encoder to encode it into the embedding space. And another relation-specific block diagonal is used to do the projection to make sure the result embedding are in the same embedding space. So this is an illustration of the first cases. So the blue vector as a matrix indicates the feature embedding space, whereas the yellow vector on the matrix indicates the spatial embedding space. So note that by utilizing the process of location-aware entity encoder and projection encoder, as well as the normal intersection operator, we can do two tasks. So to show the effectiveness of the proposed method, we evaluated it using the DBO dataset, which is built based on a subgraph of DBpedia. So this table shows the statistic of this DBO geo dataset, including the statistic of the user knowledge graph, the number of geographic questions, and the number of training samples for spatial semantic lifting. We limited the geographic knowledge graph such as all its geographic entities are all located with a continuous of US. So this figure shows all the geographic entities we consider in this dataset. So this table shows the main evaluation results of geographic question answer. So the first three columns indicate three strong baselines, which do not consider spatial information in knowledge graph embedding training, where the direct method, which indicated here, only use a point coordinate of geographic entities, where the PT method is using a multi-scale location encoder. Our model is indicated as these four models, which use the bounding box of large-scale geographic entities. So there is some interesting observation here we can make. First, if we consider spatial informations, we'll improve the performance of the QA models. Secondly, multi-scale models outperform the single-scale models, which indicate as the direct method. Third, it is also beneficial to consider the bounding box of geographic entities by comparing with four models and the PT models. So we also analysis the location encoding response map. The figure A is a clustering result of location embedding produced by the location encoder in the by the SE-KGE model. We found out that it looks very similar to the census designated region of the United States, which is shown in the figure B. So one hypothetical reason is that in the knowledge graph, the number of connections between entities within one region is more than the number of connections among entities in different regions. So that's why we were training the knowledge graph, it will showing these patterns. Figure C shows the community detection result in the knowledge graph by treating the knowledge graph as an undirectly unlabeled multigraph. This shows that locations within one state are more related to each other purely based on the graph structure. So this upper tables shows the evaluative results of different models on the spatial semantic lifting tasks, where the space model indicates the model whose entity encoder only have the space encoder, whereas the SIL model indicates a full model we proposed. This result shows that it is necessary to consider both semantics and spatial aspect in the knowledge graph embedding model design. Note that these two models are the only knowledge graph embedding model can do spatial semantic lifting tasks. All the existing knowledge graph embedding model cannot do the current task. The lower table shows some evaluative result on some specific relation types. So in conclusion, in this work, we develop a spatially explicit knowledge graph embedding model, which applies a location encoder space2vec to incorporate a spatial information like coordinate and spatial extent of geographic entities. So to the best of our knowledge, this is the first knowledge graph embedding model that can incorporate a spatial information, especially the bounding box of entities, into a model architecture. So this model has extended as end-to-end model for two tasks on the knowledge graph. Here, where the spatial semantic lifting task is a novel task proposed by us. So the evaluation results show that our model can outperform multiple baselines on two tasks. The visualization also shows that the SE-KGE model can successfully capture the spatial proximity information as well as the semantics of relations. So for future works, we want to explore a more concise way to encode the spatial footprint of geographic entities in a knowledge graph. So this concludes my talk, and this is the reference for the current presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Gengchen. This was perfect timing. So with that, now we have the microphone open for questions or the chat box. If you feel free to type your questions there or comments to Gengchen. Yeah. So if you have questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or comment or type here on the chat.
Hello, I'm sorry, I can't raise my hand.
This is perfect. No, but you unmute yourself. Hi, Emmanuel. Go ahead.
Oh, first of all, thank you so much for the presentation. I have to admit that I am not so familiar with the technology, so if I ask something naive, please forgive me. Could you please give me some details on, again, how did you encode the location in the embedding? I think there were a lot of formulas and I just missed